Welcome to the milk bar. 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 Welcome to the milk bar.
Welcome along, Jason Forrest here with you for a very special edition of the Milk Bar podcast. We're looking back at VE Day as we celebrate VE Day 75. We'll be chatting with 5 people who were there at the time. They now live in the city of Wolverhampton. Some of them aren't from these parts. However, we'll hear from Cyril Plimmer, Harold Dugmore, Jim Duncan, Malcolm Astley and Edith as they tell us something of the time around VE Day 1945. Between each of these interviews, you'll hear some fantastic songs from the era performed by the Bluebird Bells. 1940s Trio, you can find them on Facebook and you can actually buy their VE Day CD on both disc and as a digital download. So let's take a listen to not only those songs but also the interviews here on the Milk Bar. At the time of the end of World War II, Cyril Plimmer was 17. We've spoken to him in the past about the Bolton Pool project, looking at aeronautics in the city, and he joins me now for a little bit of a chat around VE Day and wartime. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you.
I trust that we find you well.
I'm well, thank you, and as well as can be at this age. But I live alone, but I'm not lonely. My wife died a few years ago, but I'm coping quite well.
That's good. At the time of the end of hostilities in the Second World War, I suppose you'd have been preparing for national service.
Yes, I should have been, but unfortunately, when I was 16 and a half, I had a bad accident playing football on what is now Aldersley Stadium, which used to be Sam Pickens' farm during those days. Mm-hmm. I slipped down and dislocated my right hip, which put me out of circulation for the best part of a year. I had several weeks in the old Royal Hospital in the old Harper Miller ward, being stretched with weights and pullers to get the old joint back into some sort of a position. Mm-hmm. By the time that VE Day come, I was out of plaster of Paris, which was not a very pleasant time, but I was on crutches and since that time, I've lived until the age that I am now, 92, and I can still walk, and that's an absolute blessing.
Absolutely.
The Royal Hospital, I remember, they talk about it being full today. In those days, there were so many wounded soldiers that came from France because D-Day had been the previous June, and of course the Royal Hospital was one of the leading hospitals in the country for orthopedic repairs and all the terrible injuries that these soldiers had during that period of time.
I'd have thought there would have been a measure of disappointment for you not being able to join up because of your injury. There was very much a patriotic spirit around at the time.
It was a wonderful time in terms of camaraderie and the way neighbours helped each other in those days was far, it was a different world than the world we know of today. And I was, my parents bought a new home in Blackburn Avenue at Claregate in 1934. And of course they were all young families, so there was quite a crowd of us. And we had lots of people of my age. Of course, when the call-up came for doing the national service, I was declared unfit, and I've been declared immobile ever since in terms of going to do my national service.
We've seen loads of pictures from parties down in London celebrating VE Day, but what was it like back in Wolverhampton and the Midlands? Was it the same sort of big party spirit?
Yes, I lived in Blackburn Avenue in Claregate with my parents and my sisters, and I recall that we had a big street get-together for all the children. Tables and chairs appeared as if by magic, and so did the food, jellies, blancmange and cupcakes, and bottles of lemonade, and we had a wonderful street party that I recall. I also recall that out of nowhere came a piano. Somebody got a piano into Blackburn Avenue, and the piano was a very good pianist. So we had a good old sing-song of the tunes that were available, and one those were in the days when the music was played and you could remember the words and remember the tunes, which is somewhat different to today's music, I fear.
Did you have a favourite of those songs at the time?
Well, of course, Roll Out the Barrel and I've Got Sixpence, Jolly Jolly Sixpence, I've Got Sixpence to Last Me All My Life, those sort of songs which I recall quite well. Remember the words even to today. And of course, Vera Lynn, of course, was one of the leading ladies at that time, of course, as you will well be aware. And she's now 103, I believe.
She is.
And still going relatively strongly, I hope. Yeah.
But when you've mentioned the fact that all this food started appearing, I mean, that must have been difficult to do under rations at the time.
It was a mystery to me, a mystery. Of course, food rationing was quite severe, wasn't it? If I recall, it was 2 ounces of sugar a week per person, bacon, and of course, meat was rationed. Well, all the necessary foods were rationed, of course. So we just managed somehow. I don't know. It's a mystery to me, but we all seem to be quite well. I can't ever remember being hungry. I can't ever remember being cold at home. No central heating, of course, in the house in that time. It was just a coal fire in the lounge or the dining room, wherever we were at that time. And of course, coal was rationed as well. But where the food came from, I've no idea. But people were quite inventive in those days.
Absolutely.
And ladies could conjure up all sorts. And of course, there was no wasted food in those days. Everything was used up. My mother was an absolute magic in the kitchen. That's as far as I can remember. Where it came from, I have no idea.
Now, of course, you heard the speech from the King on the radio, and we always see that in films depicting the time and the end of hostilities and that VE Day night. Is that something that you as a family listened to?
Yes, we had a radio, and my father at that time was always very keen that we had silence in the room while the news was read, or any special broadcast by the King, and especially, of course, by Winston Churchill. A lot of his famous speeches, as you are aware. So the radio was a big link in those days. And
we listen back and we hear the recordings of these things, and we get something of the gravity. But at the time when this is happening, and you are in dire straits of conflict, you will have been losing friends on the front line, people you went to school with, or colleagues from working.
Yes, I remember in Blackburn Avenue where we lived, there were, I think I can recall, 3 people that I knew that were probably 3 or 4 years older than me. One was named Harry Smith. He became a pilot and was lost in the mosquito raid over Germany towards the end of the war, about 44, I think it was late 44. So, yes, we lost several people in the avenue where I lived at that time, yes.
And then the gravitas of hearing those speeches and things live, talking about the loss of loved ones and friends. So now we hear the words, but they had absolutely massive meaning to you back then.
Oh, yes, but I can't recall us ever, with my family being really concerned and worried about it. There was always that air of confidence in my family, and I think in the most people that I knew at that time. When I got over this accident, and of course the war had just finished, went back to work. But during the war years, when I was doing my apprenticeship, and I left school in 1942. I went to the old St. Peter's School in Wolverhampton and started my work. I had the lowly job as an office boy in the drawing office. So that would be 1942, right in the middle of the war. And I ran errands and fetched the tea and washed the teacups for about 150 draftsmen, which were in there. I can't ever remember a feeling of being very sad or being upset or concerned about the war at that time. There was always this air of confidence that was portrayed throughout. So those are my memories of it anyway.
Unfortunately, we did win that war.
Oh, my word, yes.
VE Day was the start of the end, and obviously VJ Day that followed, and I'm sure that was celebrated, but probably not quite as heavily as the VE Day commemorations as they took place at the time.
Absolutely. Little things that I recall about those wartime days, particularly with rationing. I remember we lived next door to a family called Brooker, and Rosie was the housewife there. I can hear Rosie Brooker saying these words now. She'd come round to the back door of where we lived, which was a semi-detached house, and she'd open the door and walk in, and she'd shout my name, Gladys, can you loan me a cup of sugar, please, till I get the rations at the end of the week? You know, little things like that, which seemed insignificant at the time, but it showed how people helped each other when we were short of all sorts of things in those days.
So, Cyril, how will you be marking VE Day this year, 75 years on?
Well, of course, it'll be quite meaningful. I've reached this age of 92, which I'm surprised I've got here, but I shall obviously watch the television where a lot of the remembrance days will be going on, and probably talking to some of my... I've got one or two friends that are still about the same age as me. I think there's two or three of us left now. I shall be talking to those about those days. Mm-hmm. Because we spent a lot of time together during those days. On the actual night, I recall we had a big bonfire. Mm-hmm. We managed to find all sorts of wood from somewhere, probably chopped down one or two trees or some hedgerows, which were quite prevalent in the area where I lived. We managed to get a bunch of fireworks from somewhere. I can remember them being sold in the shops in those days. So a few rockets and a few jack-in-the-box, they called. I think that was what they were called, if I recall correctly. Although they were sad days in many ways, they were also quite meaningful days when everybody pulled together. Let us hope, Jason, that this huge epidemic that's going on will bring us together as nations of a world. I dearly hope that happens, mm-hmm. so that we can help and love one another, which is the sole reason why we're on this earth.
Yeah, we can live in hope and look forward to hopefully a good future after lockdown, also reminding ourselves of those sacrifices that were made to make sure we have the world that we can work in today.
Oh, I was involved in the aircraft industry all of my life. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the turning point, in my opinion, was 1940 for the Battle of Britain. And when the first of the few saved us, there's no question about that at all in my mind. That was a major turning point in the war, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Cyril Plymouth, thank you for joining us. Thank you for reminiscing with us. Enjoy the VE celebrations.
Absolute joy to talk with you, a pleasure, and thank you for remembering me, and I've enjoyed speaking with you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home.
Now, Edith, now the age of 90, was born in Bloxwich in May 1930 and joins me now for a chat. Hello.
Hello.
So what was it like back then? Because when the war started, you were just 9 years old.
That's correct, yes. Yes, I used to play in the road, in the Plex Road in Walsall, mm-hmm. and I lost my mum. My father went in the army, and of course we landed in the cottage homes. From then I went into boarded out, mm-hmm. and I wasn't very happy. I stayed there till I was 14 when I started to work. I was rather fed up, mm-hmm. wasn't very happy, and I threatened to run away. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was taken to London to a Salvation Army hospital mm-hmm. in Hackney, and I was very happy there. And I got myself a job was at the Venus Pencil Factory in Hackney. Yeah. And I went from there. I think I was a bit frightened because I used to see the rats and that in the factory. I used to chew the wood. So I went into a glass factory, making the bottles for the chemists, which they used in those days for the medicines. Mm-hmm. and the baby's bottles. And I used to be very, very happy there. Used to go to the pictures. We used to have to be in for certain times at night in those days, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was the rulings from the home where we were. And I never used to mind.
Well, because if we look back, though, I mean, at the age of 9 at the start of the war, we often think of kids being evacuated, but were you too old to be moved away from the Midlands, or did that...
I remember when I was in the Pleck Road, Walsall, all the lorries, I was at Smarks Church in Pleck Road, we was lying in the streets waving to all the soldiers on these lorries going up the Pleck Road. We was waving to them because we was only young, we didn't understand. Little did we realise probably they didn't come back again.
Mm-hmm.
And my brothers, the two brothers, one went into the Navy, one went into the Fleet Air Arm, and I gave the wrong ages. That wasn't the right age, but they went in. I remember all those days, and when I was in London, when it was VE Day, we went into the Mayor Street in Hackney.
Mm-hmm.
Ever so many of us from the home was there, and we was really enjoying ourselves, singing and dancing. It was wonderful, really. And there was Canadians there, Americans, our soldiers, sailors in the Air Force, and I remember there was Polish airmen. They was there. And we was really enjoying ourselves.
So all of the Allies were represented?
Yeah, well, I suppose I was on leave, really. It was all just celebrating and singing and dancing, and it was lovely. Really nice. And I didn't have a drink, by the way, because I was too young.
Uh-huh.
But it was really great. It was great. Everybody was excited. It was a lovely day.
And how did it change for you? Because obviously there was still the war in Japan ongoing afterwards.
It was awful in London. Of course, when I was 15 and a half, I met my boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
I got married when I was 16 and a half in St James's Church, Hackney.
Yeah.
Of course, you couldn't buy houses then. It was terrible. We went into lodgings. We went into a furnished room where you ate, drank and slept.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very hard. My husband worked on the building. I worked in a factory. I remember going to work in the morning. Used to go out at 7:30 in the morning, and the echoes from walking, from the debris, everything was all rumbles and everything. Mm-hmm. Everything was to the ground. Everything sounded so. It echoed when you was walking in the morning. It wasn't good, and we had our ration books, and we had to queue for everything. I even paid £1 for a quarter of tea on black market.
And £1 was a lot of money back then.
£1 was a hell of a lot of money. Yes, it really was. I remember once I was in Camden Town. I was walking down the town and I saw this horse and cart, and it was empty. It was a coal wagon, actually. I asked him if he got any bits of coal as I could have for the fire, because I got no coal. Mm-hmm. We was heating it with a gas. Anyway, this man said to me, he said, "Now," he said, "don't you get stuck in these horse and cart." He was a detective.
Oh,
he started to laugh. It was good. And I was there in 1947, which was the coldest winter I've ever known. Mm. And it was awful. We had to queue for everything, Everything. Even potatoes. It was horrendous in London. I think if I'm rightly, it's the same today, isn't it?
Well, there is a lot of queuing at the moment as people socially distance in the shops. But
and it's longer now because it's 2 metres, isn't it?
It is. But when did you come back to the Midlands and to Wolverhampton? Because you've lived in the tower blocks near Molyneux since they were first built.
I've been here since 1968.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And had the Midlands changed much when you came back?
I came back to Wolverhampton, which I've settled here since.
Yeah.
And I'm quite happy here. I lived in Northern Ireland for a while. After we left London, we went to Northern Ireland, which my husband came from Northern Ireland. He was a lawn man, and there was no work there, so we just had to come back, and we came back to the Midlands, and we've stayed here ever since.
And when you think back to VE Day, what is the one memory you take away from it? Was there a particular song or something that really sparks those fond memories?
Oh, well, we were singing all the old songs, all the old London songs, Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner, and all the old songs. It's a long way to Tipperary and everything.
Edith, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing some stories. We look forward to maybe hearing more from you in the future.
Oh, thank you for talking to me, Jason. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after tomorrow, when the world is free.
On VE Day in Fallings Park in Wolverhampton, a young man called Malcolm Astley was just embarking on his adult life. He joins me now to tell me more about what things were like at the time. Hello, sir.
Hello there.
You were 17 at the time.
I was 17, yes.
What was it like for you around that time? Was VE Day something that sticks out in your mind?
It's very difficult to step back 75 years and realise the circumstances and society then. And I suspect, really, at the time, 75 years ago, throughout the country, there will be very little celebration of VE Day at the time, unless you happen to be in a city or maybe a village with a tight-knit community. But I would suspect at the time, I doubt if there were very many celebrations throughout the country.
It's something we've come to mark on special anniversaries. I remember particularly in my lifetime the 50th anniversary, this one the 75th, and it is important for those that were there at the time, but also those who have come since to realise what was given up that got us to the point at which there was something to celebrate.
Of course, yes. If you lived in a village, a tight-knit community, there almost certainly would have been celebrations. But generally, throughout the country, I suspect not.
Because we didn't have the sort of size towns that we have now.
Well, we've got communication today so much easier. I mean, at the time, very few people had a phone. Only occasionally one had a radio. And it's very difficult to understand the circumstances at the time, 75 years ago.
Yeah, so what was it like within your family at that point? Because I take it you'd started work. Were you looking at national service as well?
Yes, I was at work, and I was in national service, yes. I spent 3 years in Palestine. I was actually in Palestine when the mandate finished and it became Israel.
So obviously there were many changes going on, and as you say, communications weren't as good at the time. So what was it like for your family when you were out there in Palestine? Were you sending letters backwards and forwards?
Oh yes. So we sending letters. Slow process, of course, with letters, but nevertheless, yes, we were able to communicate. I was in charge of the telephone system in Haifa. So I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I saw a lot of places which normally I wouldn't have seen, like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and so on, and saw those under normal conditions, not tourist conditions as it is today.
Yeah. Now, I know that you do a lot of work as a historian, and it must be interesting for you seeing other people's recollections of this time and seeing how it matches up with your own. And of course, as we've mentioned, towns were a lot smaller than they were now. Wolverhampton would have been a fraction of the size as it is now.
Oh, of course. Indeed, yes. And it's very difficult But I mean, at the time of the day, people were so relieved that the war was over, they just sort of fell aside and left it.
Mm.
I mean, they were just no. I mean, rationing was still on to start with. You know, food rationing was still on.
Well, rationing ran for another 10 years or so, didn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And so it's fairly difficult to visualise what society was like 75 years ago.
And we do see a lot of war films surrounding the period, and they show very much a great community spirit and, of course, people working together within the armed forces.
Yeah.
And there still would have been an awful lot of pressure on these people to do the jobs they were doing, and often with very little training.
Yes, indeed, yes.
So what stands out for you as a recollection of that time? Once the war was over, how did your life change?
I don't know. It's a slow process, isn't it? And society is to each individual in a way.
But I mean, ongoing after that, though, I mean, hostilities were over in Europe.
Yeah.
For many years, we still had prisoners of war coming back from places like Japan, and society probably wasn't really ready for the end of hostilities in some way, because there were some things that changed and many other things that didn't.
It's so easy to communicate today. And it's so difficult to remember that. I mean, if something happened in London at 1 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, we'll know with pictures. 75 years ago, it would have taken a fortnight to get around the country.
And newspapers playing a very different role to that which they do today.
Yes, absolutely.
When you look back in your life as a historian sharing photos online, what sort of pictures stand out for you from around that period?
Yeah, I took those photos because I could see change coming, and the only way to record what it used to be like was to take a few photos, and I just took it into my mind to do that.
Is there anything that you look back on now and you do a comparison between the way things were?
No, I'm 91 years of age, and as you probably know, I'm a tour guide at Moseley Old Hall, and I enjoy life.
And when it comes to Moseley Old Hall, obviously that survived the war, but there was worry about those sort of sites, wasn't there, at the time? There was a lot of social history lost.
Yeah, it's National Trust property, of course, but yes, it survived the war.
Just as a closing thought, I mean, what are your standout memories for you? When people talk about VE Day and the commemorations, what does it mean to you?
It's difficult. I think the abandonment of rationing, once rationing finished, and you could make a choice. I think that was an important step.
And it's that freedom again, and a freedom which just wasn't there. You couldn't choose how you wanted to live. Everybody banded together as best they could, but still there were controls in place to make sure everybody had something.
Yeah, it's a totally different society today, and it's very difficult. As I say, we're so dependent on a flick of a switch to get what we want. And 75 years ago, at VE Day, that wasn't the case.
Well, things have changed, many for the better. For now, Malcolm Astley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Gonna take a sentimental journey, gonna set my heart at ease. Gonna take a sentimental journey to renew old memories. Got my bag, got my reservation. Spend each dime I could afford. Like a child with wild anticipation, long to hear that all aboard.
On VE Day in 1945, Harold Dugmore was just 1 month away from joining up to do his national service. He's now 92 and joins me for a bit of a chat. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So you ended up on a boat on the way to Japan shortly after VE Day.
Yes, off to the Far East, yes.
You spent quite some time out there, coming back in around 48, was it?
Yes, we got as far as Malta, and they wouldn't let us in the harbour there. They kept us outside for 2 days before they'd let us in. And then I ended up in Egypt for 2 years, looking after German prisoners of war.
Because, prisoners of war didn't go home very quickly at all in some cases, did they?
No, there was still some there when I came back home in 48.
And obviously a troubling time for everybody. But for you, what was VE Day like for you? Because you'd have had the concerns of the fact that you knew it wasn't long before you'd be joining up. But equally, the fact that hostilities were coming to an end in Europe must have been something of a consolation.
Yeah, it was quite pleasant, really, to know as we was going to get back to peacetime and have plenty of food to eat, we hope, but ration carried on for quite a while afterwards.
And what was it like in that time? Because at your age, you will have obviously remembered a time from before the war, just about, when you were probably 8, 9, 10, and then to have been subjected to all that change and upheaval in your young life. That must have been a strange experience for you.
It was really, but we was my father had his own business, which was a coal merchant, and we were quite busy. So it kept me occupied, although I wasn't old enough to work in them days. You still helped out with their parents because they had plenty to do during the war.
Absolutely. You would continue your schoolwork during the early part of the war, but what did you do as a trade? Because I take it you left school at about 14?
I left school at 14, yes, and then I helped my father on the coal business. Mm-hmm. And after that, when I came out the forces, I got back with my father with the coal business and haulage. And the last 34 years, I did haulage for Cannon Industries in Cosley, which we was employed as haulier there, contractors.
What was it like with the way things changed after the war? Because you'll have seen the work that your dad was doing, and probably quite early when you were a kid, haulage would have been done maybe with a horse and cart more so than a large HGV you'd have seen towards the end of your career.
Well, we'd got horse and carts, and we'd also got a lorry. We had a lorry in 1936, which me and my younger brother, well, my twin brother rather, we attempted to drive it from our house down to the garage, which was over a field, and we managed it. And the lorry number was DRF628.
Registrations were somewhat different back then, weren't they?
They were, yeah. And of course, you hadn't got no starter. You got to get out the front and start it up with the starting handle.
And I suppose then driving lessons were somewhat different as well, because the driving test had probably only recently come in.
Well, I can't remember what date the driving test come in, but I didn't have mine till after I came out the army.
But you've still been driving before then?
I drove all through the war and through my army career, training other drivers to drive.
Things have changed a little bit around there. But what was VE Day like for you? Because were the parties in your street?
Well, do you know, Jason, I can't remember much about it. I don't know why, but that's just one part of my memory is gone.
In itself, though, there must have been a great sense of relief, though.
Oh, yes. I can remember people enjoying themselves in the street, but that's all. You know, anything other than that, I can't remember.
What is your fondest memory from around that time? What was it? Working with your dad?
Well, I was working with my dad at that time, and it was really heavy work, although I was only a youngster.
Good times nonetheless.
That's it, very good. I mean, my parents were very good, although we didn't get much to eat. We were lucky as regards some families. We did manage to get by, and we used to have our own pigs and our own hens and have our own gardens and grow our own stuff, you know. We used to get the local butcher to slaughter them because I don't know what the licenses was for it, but you weren't allowed to kill them yourselves.
But maybe people had chickens would possibly do that, but when you look at a bigger animal, it didn't happen.
My mother, she had about over 100 chickens. We used to supply all of the locals with eggs.
And that was one way of getting around the food restrictions. But how did they get food for the animals? Was it scraps that were left over from your own food?
Well, I mean, all the scraps. If you had a pig, you kept all the scraps, peelings and everything from potatoes, and there's peelings off the potatoes and carrots and parsnips and The odd leaves off the cabbages all went for food. We used to put them in the boiler and boil them up, and pigs used to have them.
Pigs will eat anything, though, won't they?
Yeah.
Obviously, after the war, things significantly changed. The UK started to get back on its feet with rationing for around another 10 years.
That's right.
Was that the point at which you started to feel happy and relaxed, though, once things like rationing had gone?
Well, although we were rationed, we never really, unhappy. We used to manage quite well. Mm-hmm. We used to you just had to get them and live with it.
And how did it work with fuel for the business, though, when you weren't able to just go and buy petrol or diesel whenever you wanted to?
Well, fortunately, having a lorry, the petrol allowance was quite good for our trade. Mm-hmm. So we were never short of petrol for that.
When you look back at your national service and the time that you spent away, it wasn't all difficult, was it? There were some good times too.
I must admit, I enjoyed my part in Egypt, but my twin brother was just the opposite. He didn't like it one bit.
But you both made it home safely?
Well, yes. We were both promoted to sergeant, so we couldn't grumble.
That's all good news. I hope you have an enjoyable time reminiscing around VE Day. Hopefully it'll bring back some of those memories that you've been struggling to recall, but still a time to mark the end of a war that we hopefully will never see the likes of again.
I hope not, Jason. It was a terrible time when the war was on, when all the bombs were dropping. I mean, I had two of my friends killed almost the first month or 6 months was the war when the bombs dropped in Ladymore.
Mm-hmm. Harold Dugmore, thank you for joining us and sharing memories.
Thank you very much.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft, but then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, blowing reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy, Company B.
Now, one of our own at WCR was 9 when VE Day happened back in 1945. It is one and only Jim Duncan. Hello, sir.
Thank you. Hello. It brings back fond memories, that does indeed.
Well, see, I hadn't realised that you were quite that old, to be honest. I think it's because you're so sprightly and get on with so much stuff.
Thank you very much indeed for those few kind words.
So what was it like for you back then? Because you weren't in Wolverhampton at the time.
No. I was living in a little village called Warfield in Berkshire, which was about 28 miles from Marble Arch, I think, or something like that. But we went to school there. We'd been out there and we went to school. My first experience of the war was back in 1940 when I first went to school. My first day at school, my mother took me up there and the Germans had bombed it and it was flattened. So that was it. And we'd then gone through the whole of the war. And we grew up in the war with people talk about isolation and this is like the war. This is nothing like the war was. We were kids. We run around everywhere. We watched the Spitfires fly. We saw the dogfights over the Battle of Britain, over London and things like that. We led in the field as kids and looked up at the sky and watched it, you know. Mm-hmm. And all these things happened and it went on. And when we went to school, our geography lessons, we used to have to bring the maps out of the papers where they were. So like going up through North Africa, through Italy, coming across on D-Day and all the rest of it in 44. So like as a 9-year-old, we were going through with it. Then it came to that marvellous bit there and it said at the end of the war, you know, my parents said, well, the war's ended, it's over. And I thought, that's fine, it's good. That was it. And on actual VE Day, my mother and father had put me in bed and they'd gone down the pub. It was a lot more civilized in those days. And the pub was about sort of like half a mile from where we lived. And I was in bed and I heard this banging going on, you know, there's a lot of bangs going on. And I thought, what's that? And I got up and got dressed, you know, a pair of shorts and a shirt and plimsolls. and rode my bike down to the pub. And everyone's all outside the pub, and somebody got about a handful of little tiny fireworks, and they were letting them off. Now, I'd never seen fireworks before, and I'm watching them. My mother spotted me at the edge of the queue there, and she came out and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'll come down and see what's going on." Said they're fireworks celebrating the end of the war. So I stood there and watched it for a while, and my mother said, go home now and go to bed. So I went home and went to bed, and that was it. The next day, we all went out, and the local farmer got his tractor. We had a tractor. I remember we had a tractor and a horse and cart. We went around everywhere and picked up all the logs and old bits of gates and everything like that. And down the wreck, we built this massive great bonfire. And then 2 days later, we had this enormous great celebration in the wreck, but everybody in the village was there, where we had this great bonfire and everything was like that. We had a big long sing-along, and somebody had an accordion and played some music. And that was our VE Day.
And we've marked this occasion over the years, and I suppose once it had happened, there wasn't really much to do and to celebrate as such each year until it became something like the 10th anniversary. And with rationing still on, was it easy to party back then?
No, there wasn't. Well, sort of like the next year it was VE Day, it didn't happen because a lot of the a lot of the local people who were from the village or in the army were still in the army. You know, they were still there, and it wasn't until August that we had VJ Day, and then the whole war in the world was over then. Although the Japanese war didn't have the same impact as the European one did to us, it was the whole of the war was over then when we had VJ Day. And VJ celebrations were very low-key compared with the VE ones in the actual time when we were there. And that was what happened with it. And it wasn't until sort of like, as you say, 10 years on, and people sort of say, oh, it's 10 years since the end of the war. By this time, it's the mid-50s. Things are still pretty hard. Sort of like rationing went on right up until the 1950s. We were still had rations and things like that, you know.
Yeah.
The only sweets you had 2 coupons, and you went down the sweet shop with sixpence and bought some sweets, and that was it.
Yeah, it's not like the on-demand stuff that you get these days, is it really?
Yeah, no. We had, there was a radio for us, and that was it there. But the actual VE Day, it was the bit before D-Day, which was the exciting bit, because we had dozens of army detachments around us, American, Canadian, and everything. The Canadians were the worst. We had some French Canadians come and stayed in the barn next to us across the field there, and they pinched half our chickens to eat because nobody had given them any food.
But when you look back at what's happened and the way in which it's been marked, obviously you've been involved in events in the city of Wolverhampton for such a long time.
Yes.
And the last big celebration was the 50th anniversary 25 years ago. And obviously it is something that we've thought about since then. And I think we think more now about it because we realise the importance of what was done to give us the lives we lead now.
It was. In retrospect, it was so magnificent. I mean, everybody went off, they were in the Army, Navy, or Air Force or something, or working in certain selected trades and things like that. But it was when you look back on it in retrospect, you realise quite what a massive event it was. But the people at the time did not seem to, okay, the war's over. We still had rationing, we still had the bits there, and we didn't have to keep the blackouts up in those days because blackouts had sort of disappeared by about 1940 because we get no air raids over or anything like that. But it was when you look back at it in retrospect, and then you started looking around, and there wasn't the massive death toll in the Second World War as there was in the First World War. Like in the First World War, half the village got killed, half the young men in the village were killed. But in the Second World War, I think there was about 10 or 15 out of our village that actually came up on Remembrance Sunday when we did that. And that was how it was looked back in retrospect.
Yeah, it was very much less of a hands-on war. I mean, the fighting in the trenches had been the signature of the First World War, the way in which people had suffered even whilst they were fighting. Yeah, Second World War, a lot of it was done in the air, and as you say, air raid stopped, but it didn't mean the bombardment had stopped because you were talking doodlebugs then, weren't you?
Oh, we had the doodlebugs come over. We had a doodlebug when the very first doodlebugs come over, they weren't very accurate. They just send them over and they go over there aimed at London. Now, as I said, we were about 30 miles from London. We had one landing field of, it was in a field of wheat, and it was August, sort of like July, August time. And the wheat was coming up nearly ripe. And we went up there after this great bang, like all kids do. We went over to see what it was. And there's the one copper stood there and said, "Oh, you kids, you can't go in there. That's a bomb crater." And the whole of the field was as though you cut it off with a scythe, the blast of the bomb going off. And it was just like I said, it got this great big pit in the middle of the field. And we said, "Can we have a bit of shrapnel then?" So we then went and got ourselves a bit of shrapnel out of the thing there off the doodlebugs. Just to see them fly over, and you could see the doodlebugs. They come over and they got this engine that's like a stroke thing popping away at the back there. Then when it stopped, you actually waited for it then to land, and the big bang that came up after it. You know, and that was how as kids we saw it. I mean, we were kids. We were looking at it. We knew no fear sort of thing if they were going off. We'd watched all the bombers going off, the big Yanks when they had the flying fortresses, and the Lancs were taking off to go up. Lancasters, you know, were taking off. You would go and watch those take off in the afternoon. You'd go and sit there on your bike and you count them. And when they were doing the big bomber raids, as kids, we'd go there. And I remember counting up over 1,000 one evening when they were doing the massive great bomber raids over Dresden. And all these planes were just flying overhead. And they couldn't have been, they weren't social distancing. They were really close together. And they were just droning over the head there. And we were kids there just sat there counting these planes, you know.
And again, as a child, it must have been amazing to see, and it was almost like entertainment was being laid on for you. But obviously, with the very serious nature of what was actually happening around you, that probably wouldn't have registered in quite the same way as it would if you were older.
No, it didn't. Not to us kids. You know, we were there when they came down training. I had a tank come down and go in the ditch there one afternoon. They were taking the tank on the exercise, and they cut this tree out down. And they laid the tree in the ditch with the thinnest end under the tracks, with the thick end at the other end, and just drove the tank up over the tracks and back on the road. When the squatters that there with us, they let us go out and sit in the tank, you know, while they were doing it there, and they were talking about it, you know. And that was sort of things that was part of our kids' entertainment, you know.
Part of the adventure of growing up in what were difficult times with limitations, but if it's all you know, it's not the same as when something's taken away in many ways, isn't it? So
no, we didn't know anything any different, you know. We'd known that there was sort of like blackout. You had no lights out at night, and you got bombs at night and things like that. And then you sort of saw it started about 42, 43. You started getting the prisoners of war came over, the Italians and the Germans. We were always very nervous of the Germans. It was sort of like all the horror stories about the German prisoners of war, what they'd do to you if they got you, so you didn't get near them. The Italians were totally different. They were very friendly. They'd talk to you. They didn't speak much English in those days, and we didn't speak any Italian. There's one or two odd words, but we won't mention those because it's radio that we used to do that. But they used to come down, they used to dig the brook out and things like that, to make it all the waterways down. They had something to do with it. They'd have one soldier there with a gun, and all these other blokes were there doing it. When I used to have the Germans there, we used to run down alongside Germans and throw stones at them, but that was another story.
Probably best we don't go there. Well, Jim, lovely to speak to you. Thank you for reminiscing. And what is your one takeaway from VE Day, apart from, you know, did you get told off the following morning when your mum had got you back home?
No. It was all sort of like great celebrations. There was everything there. I mean, there was pictures of the King and Queen up on Buck House, you know, stood on the balcony there with Churchill, and Churchill was everywhere. And of course, that was a big sign, the V for Victory sign. We all had that. We all had that sign, and I think we had a day off from school. They closed the schools and things like that, so we didn't have those. And the celebrations went on, and then we had like the street parties where you saw the organised street parties. We just had a few tables and that out there with a few sandwiches, and we all stood in there and sang some songs, and that was it.
Well, I mean, happy days at the end of a difficult time, but still not the end of the rationing and the like. So these things went on for a while, but a great cause celebration and a great event to mark today. Jim Duncan, thank you for joining us.
That's my pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long, I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song.